You are listening to The Journey. This broadcast is coming to you from the Mountain Ocean Sun studio in Kobe, Japan. And this is our third show of the series called The Journey. And the title of today's show is From Myth to Reality, the Historicity of Jesus. And today we're going to take a look at the documented historical life of Jesus and the many written testimonies of Jesus' life from non-Christian and Christian sources. We're also going to explore the various ways in which Jesus is being attacked in the media, books, movies, even to the point where the media is trying to place doubt in our minds as to whether Jesus even ever existed historically. So please welcome back to The Journey, Mr. John Saunders. Welcome back, John.
Well, thank you, Steve. It is really nice to be here again in cloudy Kobe today on this winter day.
Absolutely, and it's great to have you back. The name of today's show is From Myth to Reality. So, I wanted to share with you how the idea for this kind of theme came up for me. I was reading the internet news probably about 6 weeks ago. And just out of the blue, I was reading stuff on Trump this, Trump that. Everybody's complaining about Trump on the news.
It's the hot news for the last few months.
Right. And I saw this article that said, "Does Jesus really exist?" And that caught my eye. And so I just clicked on it, thinking it might be trying to prove that he does exist. But it wasn't trying to prove that Jesus existed. It was actually questioning if he was historical at all. And it was trying to say that he was just a myth. It bothered me very much to see that the only news that would come on such a major news outlet as Google about Jesus would be such a negative approach. And that's what started the idea of bringing out the fact that Jesus is attacked in the media quite often.
Oh, very much so, very much so. Has been for quite a long time.
Okay, so this goes back to before the internet then.
Yes. If you look at the early movie industry, the beginning of the movie industry, a lot of movies, the classic movies were either about the life of Jesus or classic biblical stories, and you find those things really did bring God into the picture. But over the years, things have changed quite a lot.
Yeah, that's what I noticed too by seeing that, because I saw that article on a big major outlet like Google News, but I never have seen something, really positive about Jesus' life and all the evidence that points to him being a historical figure, not a myth.
Well, it's just as it is with this word Xmas. It's been for a while now, maybe since I was a boy, that they take the word Christ out of Christmas and you end up with Xmas. And so you see all the Xmas celebration, Xmas decorations, and lots of X everywhere. And thankfully they don't do it with other people's birthday. Happy birthday, dear X.
Right. That would be as if it were your birthday. Instead of saying happy birthday, John, I said happy birthday, X.
Yeah, and it's X stands for the unknown factor. But Jesus is definitely not the unknown factor. We know a lot about Jesus. In fact, we know more about Jesus historically than pretty much any other character.
Absolutely. And we spoke about wanting to start the show with possibly the different ways that Jesus is attacked. On Merry Xmas, for example. And also, we found some other areas where he's being attacked in a pretty constant basis. And one is on internet news. From our angle, we could call it false news.
Oh, yes. It's a good twist on that. Yeah, this recent, idea of false news. What is false news? How do we classify false news? And without making our net too wide today, I think we wanted to list up some of the obvious ways that Jesus is attacked, so that everybody is aware of the fact that Jesus is attacked. And later, hopefully, we'll get in on the show as to why. And I think the question why is much more important than whether he is or not, because I think everybody has a little bit of a personal level of their finger on the scale on that one, and often without even realizing that we all have an attitude towards Jesus and what he stands for. And I think that's something that is really good for us to look into in the later part of our show here today. And maybe before we jump into that, I would like to add one little point that In the last few years, the world has radically changed through smartphones. And now we all have, so many billions of people have access to the internet and internet-related material, and we can get our information much faster than we ever could before, and it's much more at our fingertips. But the one thing I realize also is it's much more superficial information. And maybe that's what we're talking about today, is to kind of help people dig in a little deeper, not just stay on the surface information. And that's, as you said, this Google News comes up with some simple little article, and then automatically we have some reaction to it, and then we'll move on. But that seed is planted in our thinking somewhere.
It's a seed of doubt.
Yes, exactly. And that's the point. And if we don't counteract it with some other kinds of seeds, then it will grow into a weed.
And like you're saying, it's just appearing on a digital screen with no backup. All you're just seeing is ones and zeros put into letters, put into words that are saying something that creates a doubt about if Jesus ever existed. Whereas some of the quotes and texts that we're going to talk about are not ones and zeros on a digital screen, right? They're actual documents that have existed since that time, parchments that exist in museums or in historical showcases that are quotes from people of that day.
And yeah, that's definitely the point, that it takes a lot of time and investment of life commitment to even do a little tiny piece of this genuine research, to actually go somewhere and find the material, look at it. And it's all written in older languages, which needs to be translated, which needs to be understood in our modern idioms and phrases. So and that's something that is, way beyond the ability of anybody except somebody who has a great commitment to devoting their life to that. So let's see what we can do today, how we can help fill in a few gaps there.
That sounds good. There's a lot of what would be called the skeptic view, or the case against Jesus, or the case against Christ, that we could mention, and we'll put some of these links up there too, so that people can research both and decide for themselves which are history-based and which are just either imaginary-based or written for certain purposes that aren't based on documented history. So, to name a few of those, I guess we have the Da Vinci Code that was put out.
I think Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code is probably one of the most familiar to people nowadays.
Okay.
You mentioned that other one called the Case Against the Case for Christ.
Right, and that's like against a book that's called The Case for
Case
Christ.
For Christ.
So, these articles that we're talking about, like on Google News, like does Jesus really exist? Or the Da Vinci Code, which actually there's a lot of these type of stories out there that deny the crucifixion ever existed, or that he ever died in that way, which is also has very, very, very many historical witnesses, including Roman witnesses, non-Christian witnesses. And all this seems very connected to me, and it seems that one side is much more historical than the other, and that's what we're really working to show today, right?
Yes, definitely. I think we want to show the factuality of it.
So we're actually, we are wanting to go back to the roots of the actual historical documents and testimonies of people that lived during Jesus's life.
Yes.
And then, to me, the really exciting part or cool part of this is really, really important for us today.
Oh, absolutely, because the plants of today come from the seeds of yesterday. And so all of those seeds, if we can go back and look at them, then they can grow into plants, metaphorically, in our own lives. That those seeds can produce genuine faith in things that are real.
And timeless, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
You are listening to The Journey.
So, when I was studying about the historical Jesus and looking for the historical documents where people mention or describe Jesus as a man who walked the earth and the things that were going on around him, the main point I got was, at that time when he lived, there was no debate I couldn't find one case of a debate as to whether Jesus was a real figure in history or not. That was never debated in the times that he lived or near the times after his life. So that's interesting to me that the article I see now, 2,000 years later, is trying to debate whether he ever existed, where at the time when he lived, it wasn't debated at all. He was being reported on quite often.
Oh, absolutely. Everybody understood that. That's why Christianity grew so phenomenally in the beginning, because people did understand that it was real, it was historical, it was factual, it was an actual event, and it wasn't based on the tradition, because there was no tradition. It was a new thing. It was a radically new thing when it came in. And so it's, if you do go back and look, I think you'll find it's probably around the period of the Enlightenment where questions began to be asked. And I think that was a lot of also from disillusionment with the church system of its time. People were disillusioned with the church system, and so put God in together with the church system, and so they became disillusioned with God as a result of that. And so I think you'll find a lot of that debate started around the time of the Enlightenment, but much more recently, the idea that Jesus didn't exist. It used to be the debate was, well, was he the divine Son of God, or was he just another man? Was he some kind of good trick magician? Was he some kind of guru? What was he?
I see.
Who was he?
That's a lot of what I found, that there was a debate, but that was the debate. It wasn't if he existed historically, it was if he was the divine Son of God or not.
Yes, and I think if you look at all of the major Judeo-Christian religions, whether you look at Islam, in the Quran it talks about Jesus, it talks about Mother Mary, Jesus' mother, and it is, quite realistic in its talk of Jesus and his life. If you look at Jewish history acknowledges the life of Jesus, and again, what each group has, or each individual person in a group has, is this question of who was Jesus? Was he the divine Son of God, or was he not? That was the real question. But it's just recently we are not that deep. People are more superficial in their understanding and don't take that much time to think about it. And so it's much easier to ask the question, did he even exist? Because if he didn't exist, I don't even have to think about it.
I see. Well, when I was researching this, I came across one video about the historicity of Jesus, and the gentleman on that video said, you would never question if your father exists or your grandfather, but your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, who may be back hundreds of years, you might question if he existed or not, or who he was at all. And that was his point in saying that people are starting to do that now because it's been over 2,000 years. And they're kind of, in a way, taking advantage of the time gap. So what we were trying to do is, in this show, is take the time to locate the verified historical documents that are not from the Bible that refers to Jesus and his life.
Yes, okay. Well, let's go back, way back to the time of Jesus. At that time, it was the Roman Empire. The Romans pretty much controlled what we considered the known world. That was from the very west of Europe to the eastern extremes of Asia towards India, north of Africa, the Roman Empire. Everyone's very familiar with that. And one man who is widely considered to be one of the greatest of the Roman historians was a man called Tacitus. And we have a quote from him. And let's start with an actual historical document.
Now, this was the time right after Jesus' crucifixion, more or less?
Yes, actually, Tacitus was born in 56 AD and died in 120. So you can assume that somewhere around there, around the year 80, 90 AD, So we're talking around 30 years after Jesus was crucified. So quite close, not very far away at all. Okay, now considering that, this is what the quote says. Nero, who was the emperor, fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilatus, and a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. And that's the end of the quote there. So maybe I'd like to just spend a little minute to go back and maybe explain some points there. The Emperor Nero had a plan to rebuild Rome, and to rebuild it, he wanted to burn down what he already had. And so he blamed the fires of Rome on the Christians. And so the Christians were already, we're just looking a short time after the crucifixion, Christians were already a populace. They were already a large enough group of people to be a big trouble to the Roman emperor. And it says that they were a class of people that were hated for their abominations. An abomination is something that you have against God. And because of their view, the Romans had all of the different Roman deities. They had all of their different gods. But the Christians did not believe in those. They believed in Jesus. And so in the Romans' minds, they were atheists. You know, the Christians were atheists. They didn't believe in their gods. Okay, and we have also here some details. The reign of Tiberius, the emperor at that time, and the name of the procurator, Pontius Pilate. So we can put an exact date and a name on it, and an area of the Roman world where it happened in Judea. So it was very distinct, and it was not a positive article.
Right.
This is not a positive history. This is a very negative view. And for the problem that the Roman rulers seem to be having with Christianity, because it was taking away the worship from their own particular deities.
So in that case, who were some of the other historical figures, let's say non-Christian figures, that mention Jesus or document Jesus' existence at that time?
Oh, it's good you say the non-Christian, because some of the writing is very definitely on a negative slant, and you can see that the people writing it were not giving any kind of praise or worship to Jesus in any way, which is good because it shows the veracity of it. Okay, well, one other Jewish historian of that current time called Josephus, who was born AD 37, died AD 100, so probably around the year 60 AD he was active, which you have to consider is like 30 years after Jesus, and current with the people who were doing those things, current with the witnesses you could talk to that were actually there involved with these situations. And he also is an official historian for those times, somebody who would have access to talk firsthand with people. Quote, "So he assembled the Sanhedrin of judges," the Jewish high court, "and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some others, or some of his companions. And when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned." Now, as we understand, James, the brother of Jesus, was the first person to be killed as a martyr. To me, it's very significant that this James was the brother of Jesus. How closely and intimately do you know your family? How much would you be willing to be stoned to death for your brother if you didn't believe completely, if you were not convinced that what he had said, that what he had done was the truth. So that's a very interesting quote, not from the Bible, but from a Jewish historian, Josephus.
I see. Well, we'll put these links online. And for now, though, could you just list some of the names of the people that are documented to have historical reference to Jesus?
Okay, well, I'll just go over the full list of names that we do have here.
Okay.
And we started off with Tacitus, the Roman historian.
Mm-hmm.
There's Josephus, who we just quoted. There's Suetonius, who also lived from AD 69 to 140. So current with the time of Jesus. Julius Africanus, who lived 160 to 240. So approximately 100 years after Jesus. There's Origen, who was 185 to 254 AD, and Pliny the Younger, 62 to 113. So you have a variety of different people who have specific writings that survive to this day, that talk about Jesus, his crucifixion, his trial, and the trouble they had with Christians after that.
Okay, so, and that's the main point that we wanted to get through, that there are historical documents that have been around since that time that are real documents. So, they're verified history as if you would study them in university, same level.
You are listening to The Journey.
And that leads me to, what we've done so far. The first thing we did is we listed the ways that Jesus is being attacked in modern media. And the second part of it was we verified the historicity of Jesus by making many of the quotes from historians of the day that were not Christians. The third part I wanted to ask you about, John, was the Christian martyrs, because I know that we've talked about it before, that if there was a person who didn't even exist or wasn't real, would so many people who were walking with him willingly die?
That is such a good question. I think it's important to start with Josephus, we just finished reading there, where he talks about James, the brother of Jesus.
Okay.
We all understand, if we have brothers or sisters, we know the uprising and downfalling of our own family. We know their good points and their weak points, and how much would we genuinely be willing to die for them for something that wasn't true? If we were creating a myth, if we were creating a legend, how much would we be willing to die for it?
Because, especially brother to brother, right? Because there's a saying, right? Familiarity breeds contempt.
Oh, very much so. And if you actually look at the Bible, if you read in the New Testament itself, you'll find out that, James, the brother of Jesus, and his family were not followers of Jesus. They thought he was beside himself. They thought he was a little crazy. And they did not follow him at all.
I see.
Until after the resurrection. That was the turning point. That was the point at which they said, well, look, he's done it. He's been saying it all along. Now he's done it. We just have to believe him.
So you're saying there was a marked change in his brother James, especially?
Oh, absolutely. His brothers and sisters, it specifically says it in the New Testament, didn't believe in him until after the resurrection. So you see, already there is a marked change in his family attitude, to the point that his brother was willing to die for what he believed Jesus had said and done.
So his own brother was a martyr?
Yes.
Okay.
In AD 62.
That says a lot.
It does. I think, strangers or other people, but your own family. Yeah, that's definitely. But if you actually, let's go back and look and see, you're asking about Christian martyrs. I have a whole list here of the original disciples, followers who were later named apostles, the original followers of Jesus. You'll find most of them, nearly all of them, died as martyrs, somebody killed for their faith. They didn't die in an accident or in some other way. They were killed because of proclaiming the resurrection. That's what they were proclaiming. And if I can make reference to our first show about Easter, Easter is for real, that we talked about the resurrection there, that was the most vital part of Christianity. In fact, Christianity didn't have, quote, a Bible at all for the first couple of 100 years. It all was based around the fact of Jesus' resurrection, proclaimed first by his family and by his intimate followers who had been following him for years. I can give you a list of a few names here. There's Philip the Apostle, there's Jude, there's Bartholomew, there's Thomas, and James, and not the brother of Jesus, but the original follower of Jesus, disciple. They all died as martyrs proclaiming this message. And later we have in the beginning of the early church, there was Stephen, one of the first followers. There's one of the writers of the New Testament, Paul, who was beheaded in Rome. You find most of these original followers of Jesus did not die a natural death, but they were killed in some unnatural way as punishment for what they were proclaiming. That they were proclaiming this man, Jesus Christ, rose from the dead, was resurrected, and is the Son of God. And so that's why the contention came in. Not whether Jesus lived, but was he who he said he was? And the disciples believed it enough to die for it.
Wow. Okay, so you're saying the people that were actually with him, including his own family, were almost all of them were martyred willingly.
Yes, because they were so convicted of the truth.
Okay, that's very powerful, because we know that as time passed, there were many, many martyrs, right? But we can go back to the original time that Jesus walked the earth. The people that walked with him, including his own family, were the original, in a way, Christian martyrs that led to all these other people later on in Rome, etc., that have been martyred and are, in a way, still are being martyred today.
Yes, if you actually look at, when you can check it out on the internet, the most persecuted faith around the world is Christianity. It regularly every year has more persecuted followers than any other religion. And I guess the question comes to why? Why is that? And that's another topic that we want to look at here today.
Right. Okay, so what we'll do, we have actually a long list of martyrs, much longer than you've said. So we'll also list these on the site that can be researched for everybody who would like to study it further.
Everybody can take a little look at all those list of martyrs that will be up on the site there. And, you can see current news. There are martyrs around the world today in many places. You'll find in China and in Sudan, in many different parts of the world.
I see. Okay. We'll put all that up for further study. And there's one other point. I wanted to ask you, are there any other sources that prove the historicity of Jesus, that he walked the earth?
Okay, yeah, well, I have one other point here that actually I only myself found out quite recently, and that is that the Ethiopian calendar. In Ethiopia, they have a different calendar from different parts, from everywhere else in the world. They have their own unique calendar, which dates back to antiquity, and they have part of their calendar which is called the Era of the World, and that dates back from 5493 BC. So we're talking 7,000 years ago. Now, that also differs from the Western Gregorian, this year is 2017. That it differs from that calendar by 7 or 8 years. And it's interesting that their calendar is also an ancient testimony to the fact that Jesus was alive, that Jesus did live, because their calendar is based on this fact, that it was very connected. And I guess those who do a little bit of research on the internet, you've heard about the Book of Enoch, which has only been found in Ethiopia in recent years. And in there also, there are references to the calendars and references to the times. And so the Ethiopian calendar itself is actually more accurate and closer to the genuine birth of Jesus date than our current Gregorian Western calendar. So it's also very interesting to see it's not just the Gregorian Western calendar that we use, but there are other calendars that center around the birth of Jesus.
So you're saying that time itself is being measured differently after Jesus was here.
Yes, that's maybe another whole show we could get into. What is the significance of Jesus' birth and death and resurrection? But the calendars, the different calendars point to the birth of Jesus as a turning point in history, that something changed, something happened. It was a reset. Now, nowadays for people who use electronic devices or computers, sometimes when things start to go wrong, when things start to get broken, well, you reset it. You switch it off and you start again. You have a new beginning. And for the people of that time, in their minds, this was a world reset. That's the way they looked at it. And so what else would be more appropriate than a whole new calendar?
You are listening to The Journey.
Okay, so that brings us, I think, to the last part of this show. And I want to ask you, John, why is it that Jesus is attacked so regularly while other historical figures are left alone? For example, I never see an article on Google News that says, did Julius Caesar exist in history? Or Nero, or, Alexander the Great, or, nobody questions their existence. So, plus all the other ways that we mentioned that he's being attacked with the Xmas and the different ways that his legacy is trying to be attacked through the media and other ways. So I just want to ask you, why is it that he in particular, Jesus in particular, is being attacked so often?
That's a really good question. I think that is the $100 question of our show today. Why? And there is in general terms why, and there's also very personal terms why. And in general terms, if you talk about Julius Caesar, it was something that happened long ago, and whether he lived or died, so what? There are historians who have greater feelings than that, deeper feelings than that, but for the average Joe, for the regular person, well, so what? If he lived or didn't, it doesn't change my life, doesn't affect me, it doesn't do anything to what I do every day, because they're past and gone. But what Jesus claimed to be affects every single human being. If Jesus is the Son of God and did come to change things, to reset the world, then that affects every single human being. And we have to react to that. And so there is this both emotional reaction to it and psychological, however you want to look at it, it's kind of in our face. It's not something we can just say, well, yeah, whether he lived or died, it doesn't matter to me. But it's very threatening to us.
Why is he threatening?
Well, I'm going to go back in a little bit to an ancient writing from the Jewish scriptures written by King David. We're talking about 4,000 years ago. And this was something he wrote. This really gets to the heart of why. Now, this was 1,000 years before Jesus came.
Okay.
But as Jesus said, all of the Jewish scriptures were about me. And so that's why currently now, generally people know we have the Bible. The Bible is divided into two parts, the old part, the new part. And the new part talks about the life of Jesus and all he did. The old part talks about the old Jewish lifestyle, the Jewish happenings, what happened with the Jewish people. So how are they connected? Well, Jesus said, those Jewish scriptures are all about me. And so we go back to those Jewish scriptures and look to find the directions towards Jesus in those books. That's the only reason it's there, to direct us to Jesus, that it was all pre-recorded, it was all prophesied. So we're going to go back now and I'm going to read first through Psalms 2. Okay, and this is from the WEB, the World English Bible. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth take a stand, and the rulers take counsel together against Yahweh and against his anointed, saying, let's break their bonds apart and cast their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens will laugh. The Lord will have them in derision. Then He will speak to them in his anger and terrify them in his wrath. Yet if I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion, I will declare the decree. Yahweh said to me, You are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask of me, and I will give the nations for your inheritance, the uttermost parts of the earth for your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore be wise, you kings, be instructed, you judges of the earth. Serve Yahweh with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Give sincere homage to the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish on the way, for his wrath will soon be kindled. Blessed are all those who take refuge in him. Now that's Psalm 2. I'm going to attempt to give a simple analysis of what it means to us and what it's talking about. There is a very good lecture talk on this by Timothy Keller, and if you would like to listen to that, we can put in a reference for it down below in our site information. And I'm going to just go over this now. Okay, it says, verse 1, Why do the heathens rage and the peoples plot a vain thing? Now I'd like to suggest to you that the nations raging, the peoples plotting a vain thing, is exactly what we're talking about today. That Jesus is just a myth. Jesus is not the Son of God. Jesus was just another person in history. That's the vain imagination, that's the plot, to take Jesus out. So if you look at verse 2, it says, The kings of the earth take a stand, and the rulers take counsel together against Yahweh. Now Yahweh was the Jewish Hebrew way of referring to God in a personal sense. So it's specific against two characters here, against Yahweh and against his anointed. Now, this word anointed is a Greek rendition, and in English, it means Messiah or Christ. So now we're talking about something that was written 1,000 years before Jesus, that's saying the kings of the earth and the rulers take counsel against Yahweh, against God, and against his anointed Christ. So there we have it. The kings of the earth are taking counsel against God and Jesus, his anointed. Verse 3, Let's break their bonds apart and cast their cords from us. Okay, what is that about? Well, if Jesus is the Son of God, he came to reclaim the world. The world was broken, and he came to reclaim it as its rightful king, which means we all belong to the king. But what is it that we don't want in our own human pride? We don't want to belong to anybody. We want to be our own. I am my own boss. I go my own way. I do my own thing. I don't want anybody else telling me what to do. And so right there in this verse 3, let's break their bonds apart and cast their cords from us. So we are rebelling against what God rightfully owns. We are rebelling against his ownership of us. So in verse 4 it says, He who sits in the heavens will laugh. The Lord will have them in derision. In other words, God's going to get the last laugh in a way on this, but his laugh is not against us, it's really for us. Because why did Jesus come? He came to die for us, not against us. And so, we can go through verse by verse, but I would really recommend people listen to Timothy Keller. He does a much better job than I can here.
That quote from Psalms is from 1,000 years earlier than Jesus. Is it a form of prophecy, or is it a form of just describing human nature and how they would react to the Christ when he came to earth?
Oh, I think it's you can call it both. You can say it's how people will react, how people would react to this Messiah, this new king coming. And if you actually go back and look at the life of Jesus, when Jesus was born, the very king at the time where he was born came after him and slaughtered all the babies that were under 2 years of age in the town where he lived, in order to take away this new king who was so threatening. So as much as it was threatening for that king back there, it is also threatening for us, because here is a claim. Jesus is claiming, I am the king of your heart. Now, who is king in my heart? Well, the obvious reaction to that is me. I own myself. We are very independent people. And Jesus comes here with this and lays down this claim. No, you don't own you, I own you. And so we have this fight, this struggle, this battle going on And we are threatened by that. And that's why there is this reaction back.
So in a way, you're saying that this is a core reason why there is an attack on Jesus even today.
Oh, absolutely. Because historical figures don't change anything nowadays. And so, as we talked about earlier on, the Julius Caesars, the Neros, whatever they did or didn't do, it's nothing to us in a way. But because Jesus claimed to be the Son of God, he claimed to come to reset the world, to reclaim things, and that includes us. That is very threatening to us. And so we have to see, well, why did Jesus come? Which comes full circle back to the quote John put in the Bible, God is love. The reason Jesus came was for love.
So when you use the word own, it's not the literal way that we think of it. Like that sounds almost provokes like a slavery feeling or like a ownership, You're not saying it in that context if you're bringing up the power of love.
Oh no, I'm not, of course. But what is it that God is stating in here? And it says it many times throughout the Bible that God wants to own us in the sense that he wants to be part of us and wants us to be part of him. That we are integral, that we are part of a one thing. Jesus' last prayer says, I pray that my disciples, my followers will be one as my Father and I are one. And this sense of oneness, this sense of unity, a sense of we are this together. That is where Jesus is coming from with this ownership thing. It's not like an owner and a slave, like you do what I tell you. Jesus is coming in with, I am giving my life to fix things because I am so in love with you that I cannot live without you. And I am willing to give my life for you so that we can live together, so that we can do amazing things together. And that's what these early disciples, that's what these original martyrs were looking at. They weren't just looking at some information. They were looking at a relationship. They were part of what Jesus had done. They were part of the resurrection, that Jesus was alive and Jesus was in them and with them. And they were so in love with that was more important than their own lives to themselves. And so you could say, oh, Jesus owned them. You can say that. But they also owned Jesus in a way. They were part of the same thing.
Well, it gets back to when we talked about that they willingly martyred themselves. I mean, they were willingly in relationship with Jesus. They willingly gave their hearts. And so I think when we talk about this attack on Jesus and we talk about pride, man's pride, it's either you use the word we. So I hear from what you're saying, it's either like it's I or a we.
Yes.
You are listening to The Journey.
And that's God did not design us to live life alone. Loneliness is the world's number one problem. If we really get down to the source of so many difficulties, so many challenges, loneliness is one of the world's biggest challenges. And that's what Jesus came to cure, that he came to be one with us. And just to go back to this Psalms 2 that we were just reading, the very last verse says, give sincere homage to the Son, lest he be angry and you perish on the way, for his wrath will soon be kindled. Blessed are all those who take refuge in him. And I think, there is a constant tussle, even for people who have had a relationship with Jesus for many years. There is still this, am I the king or is he the king? Do I yield? Why do I have to follow what he wants? Why do I do what he wants? But that very last quote there, blessed are all those who take refuge in him. And our last little talk was about finding rest in the storm. And if people really are desirous to find rest, well, there is refuge in him. And that's really the key, that's where the true refuge is. That's where the true rest is. It's rest in not being our own boss. It's rest in letting him be the king, because he wants more than the very best for us. He wants unimaginably more than we can even imagine for us. Incredible things for us. But unless we enter into a relationship with him, then we will not even begin to see that. We won't even begin to understand it. And so that's where, unfortunately, much of the world is in this tussle, this feeling threatened by this king, but not coming in under the refuge of this king. And so, that's part of the Christian struggle in a way, if you'd like to call it like that. And if you look at the lives of many well-known Christians, then you will see throughout their lifetimes they have had these battles and struggles in their relationship. But it's always, the independent nature of man. It's our independence that is fighting against these things. So, as I said in the very beginning of our little talk today, is going by feelings. So much of our news searching and news looking is not by facts and figures, but by feelings. But that's what we get down to here. It's about feelings, our selfish feelings to want to be the king in our own heart, and not to yield that.
So in a way, I hope that we've clarified that this is a choice.
Oh yes, definitely.
This is a clear choice, and in a way, let's say the articles or the media or the people who are attacking Jesus, in a way, help us to choose clearly, because we do have to choose.
Yes.
Something.
Each one of us.
Right?
Yes.
And in this case, it's either we do want to have relationship or believe, or we don't. The problem I had when I read the first article was, I want to make it more clear that Jesus was here. He's real. There's so much testimony. So many people have given their lives. So much has been written about him from so many different people and angles, Christian and non-Christian, that he's actually the most historically covered human to ever walk the earth.
Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm. And so then, to me, that, in a way, in an odd way, some of these articles that are coming out, or these attacks, are a help in a way, because they help me to clarify and to study deeper the life of Jesus and the reality of Jesus, because when I see these attacks, it bothered me, and it made me want to dig deeper to see. And so I hope that this show that we've done has helped people to be able to research the choice more when they see these attacks, because you will see them in the media. You will see them. You'll just suddenly come upon something that's saying Jesus was just a myth. But we hope you'll remember this show and to come back to the sources that we've listed online, that you can study for yourself the historicity of everything that's going on, and see that it is a real choice, and that sometimes it's our own pride that doesn't want to choose to be a we instead of an I.
And that's very true. And I think we need to, as an end point, put that there, that we're not just saying believe for believing's sake. That's not the question at all. It's go look at the facts. Go look at the history. Go see that there is reality in this. And based on that reality, you can make a decision that you do want Jesus in your life. And from that moment where you make this conscious decision, then that relationship can begin. And the Bible is specific. It tells us from there, our new life will begin. So I think that's a good place to leave our audience in.
Thank you always, John. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. And just as a little PS on the end of here, I'd like to recommend for anybody who's been listening and is interested, there is out on YouTube a very recent series done by an American called Andy Stanley. And it's entitled Who Needs God? And as far as the historicity of Jesus and its significance, the part 3 is, I would like to recommend you take a look. And if you had time, look at the whole series. It really does open things up in a new way, which I hope is what we are doing here for you too.
You've been listening to The Journey. Thank you for tuning in. We invite you to join us for our next episode of The Journey, which will be focusing on the Ascension. Until then, stay well and stay blessed, and welcome to
The Journey.